You've noticed something changing inside you, haven't you? The people you once needed feel heavy now, their conversations hollow, their presence exhausting. You're not depressed, you tell yourself, you're just tired of pretending. But here's what terrifies you most. You don't miss them when they're gone. Their absence doesn't ache, it breathes. You catch yourself checking your phone less, letting messages sit unanswered for days, avoiding plans you once craved. And the strangest part, you feel no guilt anymore. The world calls this antisocial cold a warning sign. Your friends whisper that you've changed, that something's wrong with you. But what if they're wrong? What if this withdrawal isn't a breakdown but a breakthrough? What if you're not losing your mind but finding something deeper, something the noise has been drowning out for years? Ibn Arabi, the 12th century Sufi mystic, understood this transformation centuries before modern psychology gave it clinical names. He spoke of a spiritual metamorphosis that begins with a single disturbing realization. Most of what you've been living is a performance, and the audience you've been performing for doesn't even know who you really are. They know the mask, the role, the version of you that keeps conversations light and connections easy. But the real you, the one who feels too much, thinks too deeply, sees through the scripts everyone recites, that version makes people uncomfortable. So you learn to hide it, to compress yourself into something digestible, acceptable, normal. And for years it worked. Until it didn't. The moment that mask begins to crack, something fundamental shifts. You start to notice how much energy it takes to maintain these connections, how exhausting it is to match the frequency of people who never question anything. Their concerns feel trivial now. Who said what? Who wore what? Who's winning in games you never agreed to play? You try to engage, to care, to nod along, but your body betrays you. Your eyes glaze over, your chest tightens, your mind drifts to somewhere quieter, somewhere real. And then comes the guilt, the shame, the fear that maybe you're the problem. Maybe you're broken, damaged, incapable of normal human connection. Society certainly thinks so. But Ibn Arabi would tell you something radically different. He would say that what you're experiencing isn't pathology, it's awakening. Not the Instagram version of awakening with crystals and affirmations, but the kind that strips you down to nothing, that forces you to confront every lie you've been living. He called this process khalwa, spiritual retreat. But it's not about running away to a mountain cave or deleting your social media. It's about an internal withdrawal, a severing of the invisible threads that bind you to the expectations, judgments, and noise of a world that has forgotten how to be still. In his writings, Ibn Arabi described solitude not as loneliness, but as a space where the soul finally stops performing and starts listening. He understood that most people go their entire lives without ever hearing their own voice beneath the chorus of others. They mistake the opinions they've absorbed for their own thoughts, the roles they've inherited for their own identity. And when someone begins to pull away from that collective delusion, when they choose silence over noise, depth over distraction, society responds with fear, because your withdrawal reflects back to them what they're too afraid to see in themselves, that they too are drowning in meaninglessness, that they too feel the emptiness beneath the constant motion, but they don't have the courage to stop moving long enough to face it. This is why spiritually awake people are quietly disappearing from society. They're not abandoning the world out of hatred or superiority. They're stepping back because proximity to the unconscious masses has become unbearable. It's not that they despise people, it's that they can no longer find nourishment in shallow exchanges, surface-level connections, relationships built on convenience rather than truth. Every conversation feels like an extraction, every social gathering a performance, every obligation a betrayal of something sacred growing inside them. And so they withdraw, not dramatically, not with manifestos or explanations, but quietly, like smoke dissipating, like a river changing course. Modern psychology would diagnose this. They'd call it social avoidance, depression, anxiety, maladaptive coping. They'd prescribe medication to numb the discomfort, therapy to reintegrate you back into the world that's suffocating you, and maybe for some, that's the right path. But for others, this withdrawal is not a symptom of disease. It's a symptom of awakening to a disease they've been living in all along. A disease called unconsciousness, distraction, the relentless pressure to conform to a reality that denies the depths of human experience. Ibn Arabi taught that the path to God, or truth, or the real, whatever you want to call that which cannot be named, requires a turning away from the world, not because the world is evil, but because it's intoxicating. It seduces you with its dramas, its pleasures, its endless parade of things to want, to fear, to chase. And in that seduction, you forget yourself. You forget the question that burns beneath everything. Who am I when no one's watching? What remains when the applause stops, when the validation dries up, when the mirrors reflecting back your image all shatter at once? These questions are dangerous. They destabilize the entire architecture of the false self, the ego structure you've spent decades building. And so most people avoid them. They fill their calendars, their screens, their minds with noise so loud they never have to hear the silence asking, is this really what you want? Is this really who you are? But for those who are waking up, that silence becomes louder than any noise. It follows them into crowded rooms, into busy streets, into the arms of lovers who can no longer reach the place inside them that has started to open. This is when the real loneliness begins. Not the loneliness of being physically alone, but the loneliness of being surrounded by people who can't see you anymore, or perhaps who never saw you at all. You realize that most of your relationships were transactional, conditional, built on a version of you that no longer exists, and trying to maintain those connections now feels like a form of self-betrayal, of violence against the truth that's emerging. So you stop trying. You stop answering the phone, stop making plans, stop pretending that small talk doesn't make your soul scream. And people notice. They ask if you're okay. They tell you you've changed, that you're not yourself anymore. And they're right. You're not. But what they don't understand is that the self they miss was never real. It was a compromise, a mask, a survival strategy. And now that you've tasted something authentic beneath it, you can't go back. It would be like trying to fit into a child's clothes after you've grown. Uncomfortable, restrictive, absurd. Ibn Arabi spoke of this stage as the dark night, though he didn't call it that. That language came later, from another mystic, another century, another tradition trying to articulate the same devastating unraveling. But the essence is identical. There's a point on the spiritual path where everything you thought you knew dissolves. Your beliefs, your identity, your relationships, your purpose, all of it revealed as constructions, as stories you told yourself to feel safe in a universe that offers no guarantees. And in that dissolution, you are utterly alone. Not because no one loves you, but because no one can do this part for you. This descent into the unknown, this confrontation with the groundlessness of existence, this terror and ecstasy of losing yourself completely, this is your journey and yours alone. But here's where Ibn Arabi's wisdom becomes radical. He says that this aloneness, this terrifying solitude, is not abandonment. It's intimacy. When the noise of the world finally fades, when the masks finally fall, when you stop filling the emptiness with distractions and just sit in it, raw and vulnerable and utterly exposed, that's when you discover you were never alone at all. There is a presence beneath the absence, a fullness within the void, something so vast and tender and all-encompassing that every relationship you've ever had was just a pale reflection of it. He called this presence God. But don't get stuck on the word. It's not the bearded man in the sky from childhood stories. It's the ground of being itself, the awareness in which all experience arises, the silence that holds every sound. And you can only hear it when everything else goes quiet. This is why the retreat, the khalwa, the withdrawal is not escape, it's return. A return to something you've always been but forgot in the noise of becoming. Now the darkness of this teaching begins to reveal itself. Because if what Ibn Arabi says is true, if the deepest intimacy, the most profound connection, the only relationship that truly satisfies is not with another person, but with this groundless ground of being, then what does that mean for all our human relationships? Are they meaningless, distractions, obstacles on the path? This is the question that haunts every mystic, every seeker who has walked far enough into solitude to taste the sweetness hidden there. And the answer is both comforting and devastating. Human relationships are not meaningless, Ibn Arabi would say, but they are not ultimate. They are reflections, not the source, mirrors in which you glimpse fragments of the divine, echoes of the deeper intimacy you're seeking. But when you mistake the reflection for the real, when you try to extract from another person what only this deeper presence can give, you create suffering for yourself and for them. You ask them to complete you, to see you, to fill the void, to be God for you. And they can't. No one can. This is why even the most beautiful relationships eventually feel insufficient, why even the deepest love leaves a hunger unmet. Because the hunger is not for another person, it's for the infinite, and the infinite cannot be contained in finite form. So the awakening ones withdraw, not because they hate people, but because they've realized the futility of asking others to be what they're not. They've stopped trying to force human connection to satisfy a metaphysical longing. And in that stopping, a strange thing happens. Relationships either fall away or transform completely. The shallow ones dissolve effortlessly, revealing themselves as alliances of mutual distraction rather than true connection. And the deep ones, they become deeper still because they're no longer burdened with impossible expectations. They're no longer transactional exchanges of validation and need, but free offerings of presence. Two people meeting not to complete each other, but to recognize in each other the same infinite mystery. But that transformation is rare. Most relationships cannot survive the awakening of one party. Because when you stop playing the game, everyone still playing experiences it as betrayal. You were supposed to stay the same, to keep your role, to uphold your end of the unspoken contract. And by changing, by withdrawing, by refusing to continue the performance, you've broken that contract. People feel it as rejection, as coldness, as cruelty. They don't understand that it's not about them at all. It's about you no longer being able to betray yourself for the comfort of others. This is the price of awakening. This is what no one tells you when you start asking the big questions. When you begin meditating, when you first taste that deeper silence, they tell you about the peace, the clarity, the liberation. But they don't tell you about the loneliness, the alienation, the grief of watching your old life crumble while a new one has not yet formed. They don't tell you that you'll lose friends, confuse family, become a stranger in the world you once called home. They don't tell you that awakening feels less like enlightenment and more like death, the death of everything you thought you were. Ibn Arabi knew this. He wrote extensively about the annihilation of the self, the fana, the terrifying dissolution that precedes union with the real. He described periods where he withdrew completely from society, not out of disdain, but out of necessity. He needed to cleanse his heart of attachments, to burn away the false identifications, to sit in the fire of transformation until only truth remained. And in those periods of isolation, he discovered something that changed everything. That what he had been seeking outside himself, love, meaning, belonging, God, had been inside him all along, waiting beneath the noise. But the paradox cuts deeper. Because even as Ibn Arabi praised solitude, even as he emphasized the necessity of retreat, he also lived in the world. He had students, wrote prolifically, engaged in the social and intellectual currents of his time. He didn't disappear into a cave and never return. So what do we make of this? Is withdrawal the goal or just a stage? Is solitude the destination or a passage through? The answer, as with all mystical truths, is paradoxical. The retreat is both essential and temporary. You must withdraw to discover what's real, to shed the layers of conditioning and false identity, to touch the ground of your own being. But once you've touched it, once you've tasted that silence, once you've known the intimacy of aloneness with the real, then you can return. Not to the world as you left it, but to the world transfigured. You can be in society, but not of it, present with people, but not dependent on them, engaged without being entangled. This is the state Ibn Arabi calls presence in absence. You're there, but you're not there. Your body moves through the world, speaks, works, relates, but your center remains anchored in that deeper silence. You're no longer seeking anything from anyone because you've found what you were seeking. You're no longer afraid of solitude because you've discovered it's not empty, it's full. And from that fullness, your presence becomes something different. You're not performing anymore, not managing impressions, not trying to get anything. You're just there authentically, and that authenticity either draws people deeper or makes them uncomfortable. For those still asleep, your presence becomes a mirror they don't want to look into. It reflects back the inauthenticity of their own performance, the hollowness of their pursuits, the fear they're hiding beneath their busyness. So they avoid you, label you, explain you away as depressed or arrogant or strange. But for those who are ready, who are beginning their own awakening, your presence becomes a refuge. Without saying a word, you give them permission to stop pretending, to question everything, to walk away from the noise. You become, in Ibn Arabi's language, one of the hidden friends of God, those who hold space for the awakening of others simply by being awake themselves. But make no mistake, this is not a comfortable path. There's a reason so few people walk it all the way through. Because the further you go, the stranger you become to the world. Your values shift, your priorities realign, your tolerance for bullshit evaporates. You can't unsee what you've seen, can't unknow what you've known. And sometimes, often actually, you wish you could. You wish you could go back to the simplicity of unconsciousness, to the ease of fitting in, to the comfort of not questioning everything. But you can't. The door only opens one way. This is the loneliness that Ibn Arabi spoke of with such tenderness. It's not the loneliness of being unloved. It's the loneliness of seeing what others cannot see, of knowing what others refuse to know, of being awake in a world that prefers sleep. The Prophet Muhammad described it centuries before Ibn Arabi when he said, "Islam began as something strange, and it will return to being strange." He was describing this same phenomenon, the experience of those who live by a truth the world has forgotten, who hold values the culture has abandoned, who see through the illusions everyone else accepts as reality. Ibn Arabi called such people strangers, but he meant it as a compliment, a recognition of their spiritual status. Because to be a stranger in this world means you belong to another. Your citizenship is elsewhere, your home beyond form, your true companions, not the bodies around you, but the other souls who've made the same journey inward. And those souls are rare. You might meet one in a lifetime if you're lucky. Most of the time you walk alone. And yet, Ibn Arabi insists, this aloneness is the greatest gift, because in it, you discover that separation was always an illusion. That the isolation you feel is actually the dissolving of the boundaries that made you feel separate in the first place. That what you thought was loneliness was actually the beginning of a union so complete, so total, so all-encompassing, that it includes everyone and everything, but requires no one and nothing. This is the terrifying freedom of awakening. You need no one, and precisely because you need no one, you can finally love everyone. But that love looks nothing like what the world calls love. It's not sentimental or possessive or preferential. It doesn't cling or demand or expect. It's more like the sun that shines on everyone equally, or the rain that falls without judgment. It's a love that's willing to be alone, willing to be misunderstood, willing to let others walk away if that's what their path requires, because it's rooted not in need, but in fullness, not in lack, but in overflowing. This is what Ibn Arabi means when he speaks of the perfected human, not someone who has achieved greatness in the world's eyes, but someone who has become so empty of self that the divine flows through them unobstructed. Now we arrive at the darkest part of this teaching, the part that makes most people turn back. Because if this is the path, if awakening requires this much solitude, this much misunderstanding, this much loss, then why walk it? Why not just stay asleep, stay comfortable, stay connected to the world in the ways everyone else is? Why pay the price of becoming a stranger when you could just stay familiar? The answer is simple and brutal, because you don't have a choice. Once the awakening begins, once the mask starts to crack, once you've glimpsed what's real beneath the performance, you can't go back. You can try. You can numb yourself with work, with pleasure, with relationships, with substances, with endless distraction. You can spend years trying to re-enter the dream, to forget what you've seen, to make yourself fit again into a life that no longer fits you. But it won't work. The discomfort will only grow. The exhaustion will only deepen. Until finally, you surrender to the truth you've been running from. This old life is over and you have to let it die. That surrender is what Ibn Arabi calls the annihilation, and it feels like death because it is death. The death of the false self, the ego, the constructed identity you've been maintaining. But here's the twist, the redemption hidden in the darkness. On the other side of that death is not nothing. On the other side is everything. A life lived from truth rather than fear, from presence rather than performance, from the infinite ground of being rather than the shaky foundation of others' opinions. A life that is simultaneously more solitary and more connected than anything you've known. Because once you've made peace with aloneness, once you've discovered the presence within the absence, you're free to connect in ways you never could before. You're no longer desperate for connection, no longer willing to compromise yourself for it, no longer afraid of losing it. And that lack of desperation, that inner fullness, paradoxically makes you more capable of genuine relationship than you've ever been. Because you're finally meeting people from wholeness rather than need, from curiosity rather than hunger, from love rather than fear. But those relationships will be different. Fewer, deeper, less predictable. You won't have a large circle of friends, won't be invited to every party, won't be enmeshed in the social fabric the way you once were. And that will be okay. More than okay, it will be right. Because you'll have stopped trading depth for breadth, quality for quantity, truth for belonging. You'll have stopped betraying your soul for social acceptance. This is what Ibn Arabi understood, and what modern psychology often misses. Not all withdrawal is pathology. Not all solitude is dysfunction. Sometimes distance from people is not coldness but clarity. Sometimes it's not depression but awakening. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away from relationships that require you to be small, conversations that keep you asleep, a world that rewards unconsciousness. But you have to be honest with yourself. You have to ask the hard questions. Am I withdrawing from wisdom or from fear? Am I seeking genuine solitude or just hiding from my wounds? Am I listening to the call of my soul or the voice of my trauma? Because there's a difference. Real spiritual retreat, the kind Ibn Arabi describes, is not escapism. It's confrontation. Confrontation with everything you've been avoiding by staying busy, staying social, staying distracted. It's sitting with the discomfort, the fear, the grief, the rage, all the feelings you've been outrunning your entire life. And in that sitting, in that willingness to feel it all without fixing it or fleeing it, something shifts. The noise inside you begins to settle. The frantic seeking begins to slow. The need for external validation begins to loosen its grip. And in that settling, that slowing, that loosening, you begin to hear it. The silence that speaks, the emptiness that's full, the aloneness that's pure intimacy. Ibn Arabi called it the voice of the real. Others call it intuition, the soul, the higher self, God. The name doesn't matter. What matters is that you've finally gone quiet enough to hear it. And once you hear it, everything changes. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, irrevocably. Your life begins to reorganize itself around this deeper listening. Relationships that don't serve your awakening fall away. Work that doesn't align with your truth becomes unbearable. Conversations that stay on the surface feel like violence. You become ruthlessly protective of your energy, your time, your presence, because you finally understood that your life is finite, that your attention is sacred, that every moment spent in inauthenticity is a moment lost forever. This makes you seem cold to those still living unconsciously. They experience your boundaries as rejection, your honesty as cruelty, your withdrawal as abandonment. And you have to let them. You have to let people misunderstand you, judge you, explain you in ways that make them comfortable. Because the alternative, shrinking yourself back down, dulling your light, pretending you're still the person you were, is a betrayal you can no longer commit. Ibn Arabi faced this same judgment. His teachings were controversial in his time, too radical for the orthodox, too mystical for the rationalists. He was misunderstood, criticized, occasionally exiled. But he kept writing, kept teaching, kept pointing toward the truth he'd discovered in his own khalwa, his own periods of profound solitude and spiritual retreat, because he understood that some truths are not popular, not comfortable, not easily received, but they're still true. The truth he kept pointing toward is this: you are not the small self you think you are. You are not the collection of memories, roles, and identifications you've been carrying. You are not your thoughts, your feelings, your body, your history. You are the awareness in which all of that appears and disappears. You are the space, the openness, the presence that has been here all along, unchanging and untouched beneath every experience. And discovering this, not intellectually but experientially in the depths of your being, is what awakening actually is. But that discovery requires a dying to who you thought you were, to what you thought you needed, to the entire story you've been telling yourself about your life. And most people are not willing to die. They'll rearrange the furniture of their lives, update their beliefs, swap one addiction for another, but they won't go all the way down into the groundlessness where everything dissolves. Because it's terrifying. Because there are no guarantees. Because you might lose everything and discover nothing on the other side. Except Ibn Arabi promises you won't. He promises that on the other side of that death is a life more real than anything you've known. A life lived from the infinite rather than the finite, from truth rather than illusion, from love rather than fear. A life that is simultaneously utterly alone and completely connected, because the separation between self and other has been revealed as the ultimate fiction. But he can't prove it to you, no one can. You have to walk through the fire yourself. And that's what the withdrawal is, the walking through. When you distance yourself from everyone, when you choose solitude over society, silence over noise, you're not running away. You're running towards something too precious, too sacred, too real to be found in the distractions of the world. You're giving yourself the space to die and be reborn, to unlearn and relearn, to shed every false skin until what remains is the raw, tender, infinite truth of what you are. But the world will not applaud this journey. The world wants you productive, social, consuming, performing. The world needs you to stay asleep because your awakening is a threat to the systems that depend on unconsciousness. So when you withdraw, when you stop playing the game, when you refuse to pretend anymore, you will be pathologized, marginalized, forgotten. And you have to be okay with that. You have to be willing to be the stranger Ibn Arabi spoke of, the one who belongs to another world, even while living in this one. This is not a path for everyone. Most people are not ready for this level of aloneness, this depth of questioning, this complete dismantling of the familiar. And that's okay. There are many paths, many ways to live a human life. But if you're reading this, if something in these words is resonating in your chest like a bell that won't stop ringing, then maybe this path is calling you. Maybe the withdrawal you've been feeling is not a problem to fix, but a summons to answer. Maybe the coldness people accuse you of is actually clarity, and the distance you're creating is actually the space you need to finally hear the truth. Ibn Arabi spent his life trying to put this truth into words, knowing that words could never capture it. He wrote thousands of pages, composed poetry, constructed elaborate metaphysical systems, all pointing toward an experience that lies beyond language. But he kept trying because he understood that some souls need the pointing, need the permission, need to hear from someone who has walked the path that yes, you're not crazy, yes, this is real, yes, it's worth it. So consider this your permission. If you need to withdraw, withdraw. If you need to let relationships fall away, let them fall. If you need to disappoint people in order to remain true to yourself, disappoint them. If you need to be alone for a while, for a long while, be alone. Not because you're running away, but because you're finally running toward something real, toward the silence that speaks, toward the emptiness that's full, toward the aloneness that reveals itself in the end as the deepest intimacy you've ever known. And when you've touched that, when you've tasted that silence and let it reshape you from the inside out, you might return to the world. Or you might not. Ibn Arabi did, but others have stayed in retreat for lifetimes. There's no right answer, no prescribed timeline. The path unfolds uniquely for each soul. What matters is that you follow your truth, not someone else's expectation of what your life should look like. What matters is that you stop betraying yourself for belonging, that you stop performing for approval, that you stop accepting the world's definition of normal when normal means staying asleep. What matters is that you have the courage to walk away from everything that asks you to be less than you are, even if walking away means walking alone. Because here's the final, devastating, liberating truth Ibn Arabi discovered in his own khalwa and spent his life trying to convey: you are already alone. You've always been alone. Every relationship, every connection, every moment of togetherness is a beautiful, temporary meeting of two fundamentally solitary beings. You were born alone, you will die alone, and in between, no matter how close you get to another, there's a part of you they will never reach. Not because they're not trying, but because that part is not reachable by another. It's the part that belongs only to the infinite, the part that is the infinite. Once you accept this, truly accept it, not as a depressing fact, but as a liberating truth, the fear of solitude evaporates, because you realize you're not losing anything by being alone. You're not missing out, not falling behind, not failing at being human. You're simply acknowledging what has always been true and what everyone else is too afraid to face, that we are each utterly, completely, irrevocably alone in our experience of being. And that aloneness, when you stop running from it, is not empty. It's the fullness of existence itself. This is what Ibn Arabi means when he speaks of unity, of tawheed, of the oneness that underlies all multiplicity. He's not talking about everyone holding hands and singing. He's talking about the recognition that the self you think is separate from everything else is an illusion, that the boundaries you experience between yourself and other are conceptual, not actual, that in your deepest being, in the silence beneath all thought, you are not separate from anything. You are the awareness in which the entire universe appears. And from that awareness, solitude and connection are revealed as two sides of the same coin, two expressions of the same reality. But you can't think your way to this understanding. You have to live your way there. You have to withdraw from the noise, sit in the discomfort, face the void, let everything dissolve. You have to be willing to lose your mind, your identity, your grip on reality as you've known it. You have to surrender to the not knowing, the groundlessness, the terrifying freedom of a life no longer defined by others. And somewhere in that surrender, if you're patient, if you're willing, if you don't flee back into distraction, something happens. The silence stops being empty and starts being alive. The solitude stops being lonely and starts being intimate. The withdrawal stops feeling like death and starts feeling like birth. You realize that what you were seeking all along was not out there in the world, not in the approval of others, not in success or love or any external condition. It was here, in this silence, in this stillness, in this simple presence that requires nothing and contains everything. This is the awakening Ibn Arabi points toward. This is why those who taste it often withdraw from society, not out of rejection, but out of satiation. They found what they were seeking, and it's not in the marketplace, not in the crowd, not in the constant motion of a world that has forgotten how to be still. So they step back, they create distance, they choose solitude, and to those still seeking outside themselves, this withdrawal looks like coldness, like depression, like something broken. But to those who understand, it looks like what it is, someone who has finally come home. So if you're one of the ones who's withdrawing, who's distancing, who's quietly disappearing from the social fabric, don't let them convince you you're broken. Don't let them medicate you back into unconsciousness. Don't let them shame you for needing what you need. Trust the pull towards solitude. Trust the hunger for silence. Trust the part of you that would rather be alone with truth than surrounded by comfortable lies. You're not cold. You're awake. And awakening, as Ibn Arabi knew, is the loneliest and most beautiful journey you'll ever take. It costs you everything, and it gives you everything. Not in the world's currency, not in ways others will recognize or celebrate, but in the only currency that matters, the truth of your own being, finally met, finally known, finally lived. Walk into the silence. Let everyone fall away if they must. The infinite is waiting there, in the space you've been afraid to enter. And when you finally arrive, when you finally stop running and let yourself be held by the vastness you've been seeking, you'll understand what Ibn Arabi meant. You'll understand that this aloneness is not absence, but presence. Not separation, but union. Not the end of connection, but the beginning of the only connection that never breaks. You were always alone, and you were never alone. Both are true. This is the paradox you must live your way into. And the withdrawal, the distance, the quiet disappearance from everything that once defined you, that's not the destination. That's just the doorway. Step through,